Welcome to the AE Hoops Podcast.
Rebound comes out to Hooley for the win.
With special guest John Feinstein.
The tip is no good, and the Seawolves are going to the big dance.
Oh, my goodness! Sorrentine hit that one from the parking lot, and Vermont has a 59-55 lead.
Now, here are your hosts, Sam Schwartz and Jared Hager.
Welcome to the second edition of the AE Hoops Podcast. This week, you'll hear from John Feinstein as well as Eric Freed, who has some shakeups to his top four. Let's get it on. All right, welcome to the AE Hoops Podcast, and I am pleased and honored to welcome in New York Times Bestselling Author. He made his mark in college basketball with A Season on the Brink. You can also find him on Sirius XM Radio, the Golf Channel, and the Washington Post. John Feinstein. John, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Sam. Good to talk to you.
You as well. So let's start off college basketball. Obviously, you are a bit of an expert with all your writing. You vote for the AP poll, and we have a new number one, actually a first-timer at number one, Baylor, 15-0 on the season. What have you seen so far in the college hoops season?
Well, Baylor's interesting because I don't think they even got a vote in the top 25 in the preseason poll. So I was among those who missed out on how good Scott Drew's team is this year. They played arguably the toughest non-conference schedule in the country and came through undefeated. They had a couple tough wins at home last week, and I actually tweeted on Sunday that I was going to vote for them number one because I vote based on what you've done, not what I think you can be. But I'm still not convinced that they're not only the best team in the country, but one of the best 4 or 5. But based on their play and on their schedule, they deserve to be number one right now. A lot of the teams that were picked in the top 5 early have stumbled, which isn't that surprising in college basketball today. Duke has obviously had a tough year with injuries, and now with Mike Krzyzewski out. Kentucky had a couple surprising losses, particularly the one at home to UCLA, but UCLA has been arguably the most pleasant surprise outside of Baylor in the country to date. So it's still very early. We still got a lot of basketball to play before Selection Sunday.
You brought up your alma mater, Duke. They're currently 7th in the country, 14-2 on the season. And you mentioned Krzyzewski being out. They've been in the news, seems like a lot recently. What's kind of going on with Duke, and how do you kind of forecast the rest of their season going?
Well, it's hard to say because, again, they had another injury on Saturday with Emil Jefferson. He's not going to play at Florida State, and it's a foot injury. Duke always has foot injuries. I don't know why, but over the years they seem to have every year at least one and sometimes more players with foot problems. Maybe it's the shoes, as Nike would like to say. But they had a highly touted freshman class, and then they all got hurt before the season started. So as Krzyzewski said, even before the announcement that he was going to have the surgery, he felt like he had a team that was in October mode going into January. So they're behind. Now they're without their head coach. And, of course, there was the Grayson Allen thing, which becomes, international news because it involves a Duke player. Interesting that the kid Brooks at Oregon kicked somebody in the groin over the weekend, and that makes no news, whereas Grayson Allen tripping somebody, literally I got a call from the NBC News division, not sports, about the story. So that's part of going to Duke, that you're going to be inside that microscope all the time, and so they've had a rough path to this point, and it doesn't get any easier going to Florida State and Louisville this week, that's for sure.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit to the mid-majors. You've written books on a variety of topics. Obviously, you're a college basketball expert. I think I can say that, and you can agree with that. But you wrote The Last Amateurs, which focused on the Patriot League, so you do have some mid-major experience at that.
Mm-hmm.
John, what makes mid-major basketball so special?
Well, first of all, I think that people who only focus on the so-called big-time teams miss out on the fact that there's a lot of very good basketball played at the mid-major level. That's why every March when the upsets happen in the NCAA tournament, I'm not shocked because there are always several mid-major teams, quote-unquote mid-major teams, that are worthy of national consideration and are almost always underseeded by the basketball committee. And that's why you see 12s and 13s and 14s consistently winning at least 1, 2, or 3 games in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I love the atmosphere in smaller gyms. I find them more fun than the NBA arena-like places that most of the big-time schools play in now. So I enjoy that aspect of it. I also, as a reporter, love covering teams that have kids on them who are actually glad to talk to you, who don't think they're doing you a huge favor by giving you a few minutes of their time. It's a much different feeling than not with all the kids at big-time schools, but with a lot of the kids at big-time schools. So I enjoyed myself very much doing the last Amateurs, and the story I've always told that to me kind of summed it up was I was at a Lafayette Bucknell game, both very good teams in the league that year. It was a great game. Lafayette ended up winning in overtime, and I was in the Lafayette locker room afterwards, and I was talking to their point guard, Tim Bigg, who's now a lawyer. And Tim said to me, "So were you surprised that Bush beat McCain in New Hampshire last night?" Because it was the day after the 2000 New Hampshire primary. And we had a whole conversation about the presidential election, and I was thinking, I'm not going to get a lot of questions like that in an ACC or an SEC or a Big Ten locker room. It was just a different world, and I can honestly say I enjoyed that season as much as any in the many years that I've covered basketball.
And you do have some experience in some mid-major facilities, as you mentioned. You provide color commentary for UMBC men's basketball. They got off to a tremendous start and a historic one at that. They're undefeated in conference play so far. John, is there anything in particular you can attribute their success to?
Well, I think you have to give a lot of the credit to Ryan Odom. Now, I'm biased because when I first met Ryan Odom, he was sitting on his mother's lap at a Durham high school game at the age of 3. When I was in college, I covered Durham High on occasion as a stringer for the local newspaper there, and the coach was Dave Odom, Ryan's dad, who of course went on to coach at Wake Forest and coach Tim Duncan and was in the Elite Eight and had a great coaching career. So I've known Ryan literally, almost literally his entire life. And when he called and asked me last summer if I would do some of the games at UMBC, I was delighted. The school's 45 minutes from my house, and I've spent a lot of time at the school in the past. I've actually been involved in swimming meets there because I'm an old master swimmer, and UMBC hosts a lot of master swimming meets, including the national championships back in 2000. And I was there when Randy Monroe's team won the America East title in 2008, which was their biggest moment, and they haven't had anything close to that until this season. And I think Ryan brought a new attitude to the team. Most of the players are the same guys who won 7 games all of last season. They've added a really good junior college guard in KJ Mora, but beyond that, it's pretty much the same players. They're a year older, and I think that they had a pretty soft schedule early, which allowed them to build some confidence. And then the win at Duquesne clearly gave them a lot more confidence. And they bought in, as the cliche goes, to what Ryan is preaching to them. They're playing up-tempo basketball, which players generally enjoy. And Ryan said to me the other day before they played Maine, I don't have any trouble getting him to sprint into the offensive zone. Now we got to work more on sprinting back on defense, which is always the biggest challenge for a coach.
Ryan Odom, in his first season at the helm at UMBC, you of course get a little bit of the behind-the-scenes look at him. What is kind of your initial impression of, kind of a different flavor he's bringing to the team this year?
Ryan's very laid back. Like any coach, there are moments when he'll get on his guys because he needs to. But he doesn't panic. I've seen several games now, and including a game they lost by 1 to Towson, missing a pretty good shot at the buzzer, and another game they won in double overtime against Citadel. And in the Citadel game, they had a lead late in the first overtime. Citadel hit a couple threes because they shoot them on just about every possession. And during the break between the first and second overtimes, Ryan said to his players, "This is what you play college basketball for. This should be fun. Just go out and enjoy this game because it's a great game." Not a lot of coaches in that circumstance, having lost a lead in an overtime, might say that. But Ryan was completely cool, and he transmitted that to his players, and they came out and dominated the second overtime and got the win. He's sort of the classic example of a guy who doesn't let you see him sweat.
Yeah, that was an awesome game. Maybe the game of the year so far at that. One lone
Certainly
game.
offensively.
Offensively, yeah, right, exactly. Big game for Jaroslaus. But the lone game in America East basketball, men or women, on Friday, UMBC travels to Vermont, 7 o'clock tip-off. You can find it on AmericaEast.tv. UMBC facing the preseason favorite as it stands, both teams undefeated in conference play. I know you won't be covering the game on the broadcast, John, but is there anything you look forward to or can kind of forecast for Friday's game?
Well, I think this week is a really good test for UMBC. Vermont, for really the entire 21st century, has been the flagship of the America East. Obviously, that huge win against Syracuse in 2005 when Tom Brennan was still the coach, and then Mike Lonergan picked up from there, and John Becker's picked up from there. I think he's won 20 games every year he's been there. And you know, that's not to knock what Albany has accomplished or what Stony Brook did the last couple of years. But Vermont's been the school that's been there all the time for most of the 21st century, as I said. So going to Hartford and then traveling up to Vermont, that's a really good test for a team that looked very good winning at home this past weekend twice. But going on the road, that's where you really get tested, especially, I'm not going to call UMBC a young team, although they only have one scholarship senior, but they are a new team. They're playing in a different way. And to go into Vermont to play the team that, as you said, is the favorite, is already off to a 2-0 start, and is a team that you know is good every single year, that's going to be a great test for Ryan Odom and his team to see where they are. At that point, they'll be 4 games into their schedule.
America East and the You Can Play Project are committed to ensuring equality, respect, and safety for all athletes without regard to sexual orientation or gender identity. Visit youcanplayproject.org for more information.
Just like every week, we are very excited to be joined by Eric Freed. Eric's been covering the conference for almost 25 years. An A hoops expert, if you will, but not only that, Eric's been very involved in the Northeast sports scene for a long time. Still on CSN New England on weekends. You might see him on there doing some UConn women's basketball. But Eric, we're always glad to be joined by you, and love hearing your expertise on.
Thank you, Jared. It's very nice. Did you record that so you can play that back before every single podcast? Because I don't think you can top that introduction. I may just play that out loud in my house when I come home after a road trip or something, just to remind everybody.
Make it a ringtone.
That was very good. Yeah, that would be a good ringtone. Yeah, no, let's. You want to just hop right into it? You want to just get right to it? The new top 4 this week?
Yeah,
There's not a change of top, but I mean, now, like we've discussed, the top 4 is going to be a living, breathing thing, Jared. We understand that, right? Like, you know, you get a couple of games in a week, couple of surprise performances, you're going to get rewarded with top 4 placement. It's not necessarily who the top 4 teams are going to be semifinal weekend in tournament play. So I think that's the beauty of it. Yeah, that being said, Vermont is the number 1 team, so there's no surprise at all. I mean, 12-5 now, RPI off the charts, 78 this week. And they get, one of their key rotation guys back who had missed the previous 5 games with a knee injury, and that's Peyton Henson. So they've got the depth. They've got all the pieces. They cruise through the opening week of the season. They've won 4 in a row overall. They are a firm firm number one in this week's top four.
Yeah, very impressive opening week for the Catamounts, and they earned that number 25 ranking in the College Insider mid-major poll, so being rewarded for their efforts thus far.
Sustaining it's going to be the thing. But so now we've got a little volatility this week, okay? So at number 2 with a bullet, the Stony Brook Seawolves, because you're going to get rewarded if you go into Durham and you knock off the team that was picked number 2 in the preseason poll and you pull out a win in the conference opener. And then when you go on a 21-0 run to close out a game to get a victory, I think that's worth a number 2 spot in this week's poll. I still can't believe after watching that online from Long Island that they were able to go on a run like that. But you know, we saw some of the signs of the game that I was at Durham. You know, they've got a lot of energy, Jared. Nyama and Sturdivant and Woodhouse was kind of out of the mix a little bit, but you know he may be having an off day or be taken out of the offense, and then all of a sudden he's hoisting a shot, and you know it's going in. So they're playing with a ton of confidence, and I really like their energy, their enthusiasm. That goes a long way. Certainly helped them against UNH, and then to be down 19 and not quit, not give up on their home floor. That was pretty impressive. So I'm throwing the Seawolves up to number 2 out of being not in the top 4 last week to number 2 this week.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, well-deserved. What a couple performances we got to see. A 21-0 run over the final 5 minutes to win that game against Albany.
That's crazy. And, so they're number 2. Number 3 is UMBC. Good start in conference play. Best start at the Division I level in school history. They've got the top 3-point shooter in the country. They get Rodney Elliott back into the mix. Challenge coming up now for the Retrievers, Jared, is 4 of their next 5 are going to be on the road. But, you know, that's a team that surprised a lot of people under new head coach. We talked about it a little bit last week, how we threw them in the top 4 last week. Well, they moved from number 4 to number 3 because they took care of those first 2 conference games. And so the Retrievers, number 3.
And a couple tough tests for the Retrievers. You mentioned 4 of the next 5 on the road. That they're at Vermont on Friday night, so that will definitely be a tough test for that UMBC team. And rounding things out at number 4.
I am throwing the Jahad Thomas-led UMass Lowell Riverhawks into the 4 spot. Back-to-back Player of the Week awards. What was his line, Jared? 28 points, 15 boards, 5 assists against Binghamton. He's in the top 3 in scoring and rebounds and assists and shooting and steals. And it's not like he's a 6'9" guy or Jameel Warney type. He's a guy that we've seen for the last couple of years and been impressed by. He's battled through injuries, a couple of knee injuries, to be one of the more dynamic players in the league. Lowell's playing well. I think they deserve top 4 status just when you see what they've been able to do and what Jahad has been able to do. So I'm throwing the Riverhawks into number 4. So that means Albany and UNH has dropped out. They have both dropped out of the poll this week.
Yeah, and for those 2 teams that dropped out, really big game coming up on Wednesday night. They play each other, and not that you're talking about a must-win game this early in the season, but 0-2 for Albany
Every
to
game
start
matters,
the year.
Jared.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to get myself in trouble either. So.
Well, I just think, again, this is the second week we've done the poll, and things could change as the season goes along. You mentioned that UMBC's got to go up to Burlington and Patrick Gym. That will be the biggest eye-opener that they face. But if you're going to go out, you're going to get some non-conference wins like Lowell did, and you start the season with a couple of victories. I don't care who's on the schedule. I think you deserve it. Now, it's not like New Hampshire and Albany are 2 teams that aren't very close to being in the top 4. I think New Hampshire's still trying to figure a lot of things out. They've hit a little bit of a slump here. They just didn't seem to be playing with a lot of confidence, a lot of energy against Stony Brook. Now that the decision is official that Jacoby Armstrong will redshirt this year, that he won't play at all, that may settle things down a little bit. They're still a little thin when it comes to depth, and I think that was obvious when a couple of their key guys, Iba Kamara and David Watkins, got in the early foul trouble against Stony Brook. But I think New Hampshire needs a little time to figure things out. And I think Albany, too. I'm very bullish on Albany. I mean, I just think the history proves that they're going to be a good team. I think when you're relying on a couple of sophomores, it's easy to forget that Joe Cremo is just a sophomore, and we've seen how David Nichols has improved that team, and when he fouled out, things kind of went south for Albany. I'm still very bullish on Albany, and I think they'll figure it out, but I think for UNH and Albany, they're going to need a little bit more time to find out what they have. And as you mentioned, Jared, it's a great point. They'll find out a little bit more when they go head-to-head this week.
Yeah, is this something, Eric, as someone who's been around the conference for a long time, is this something that you think we'll see throughout the year? Just, maybe a couple surprise results in that middle of the pack with those teams like Albany, UNH, UMass Lowell, Stony Brook, UMBC, just all kind of beating up on each other?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I know a lot of the coaches, and I know, this week I was at UNH, so I talked to Jeff Bowles and I talked to Bill Herring. Now, Jeff Bowles is new to the league. This is his first trip to Durham, his first road trip everywhere, his first go-around in the league. But Bill Herring's been around a long time, and he said this is going to be one of those years where the bottom half of the conference is better, and we've seen that a little bit with Lowell. Binghamton had a very good non-conference schedule. Hartford's had a couple of impressive wins. Maine has just been devastated by injuries, and if they're able to get just a couple of guys healthy, that's a team that could pull something off on any given night. So I think that's been the case. We've had times through the years, as you well know, Jared, that a team has just run away from everybody else in the league. And are the early signs that Vermont could do that? Yeah. But I still think a team like Albany and a team like New Hampshire, if they get their rotation, they get what they're trying to do set, and it may take a little bit longer than anybody expected. I think those teams could give Vermont a run. Vermont right now, though, barring injury, barring illness, barring anything else, they just seem to be one of those teams that will look back like we did the past Vermont teams of being that team that may not be a game that you're going to get, But I will say this, though, Jared, and you're good with the history. I know Vermont this week is at Binghamton on Wednesday. They've had some big headaches going to the event center. And that could be a sneaky good game on the schedule because Binghamton, after a pretty good non-conference schedule where they went 9-6, they've lost a couple of games. So there'll be a little bit of urgency on the Bearcats' part. No question playing at home, right? And they've had success against Vermont specifically through the year. So I think that'll be one of those games to watch this week. You mentioned New Hampshire at Albany. It'll be a good Wednesday because Lowell's trying to go 3-0. UMBC's trying to go 3-0. You get the New Hampshire-Albany matchup, a couple of teams looking for their first conference win after New Hampshire had the bye. And again, Vermont at Binghamton, the trip to Vestal hasn't always been great for the Catamounts.
Now, a tough place to play, too, with the BU Zoo and just that road trip. It's a long bus ride from Burlington to Vestal.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's you just hope that the weather's good. So, hey, Jared, pleasure.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
I'll try not to turn the apple cart upside down next week for the top four, but it's just it all depends on what's happening in the league.
Yeah.
So if it's a crazy week again, expect a little trip to the popcorn popper again.
Well, we're looking forward to it. As always, we appreciate the weekly segment that we have with you and listen to your expertise from around the league. So thanks again, Eric, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, we'll see you at the games. Thanks, Jared.
Are you a former America East student-athlete interested in staying connected with the conference, networking with other former student-athletes, professional development opportunities, and more? Find out more by searching for the America East Alumni Network on LinkedIn and request to join. All right, John, this brings us to our final segment, which we like to call One Good Story. And we'll ask you to share a story of yours, whether it's from your career, coming up as a journalist, reporter, or college basketball related, you name it. John, let's hear it.
Well, there's a story I tell all the time about how lucky I consider myself to be to do what I do and to have done it for so many years. Back in 1997, I was researching a book on ACC basketball and spent the entire season around what was then a 9-team league. And obviously one of the big games on the schedule that year was North Carolina at Duke. It was Dean Smith's last year. Mike Krzyzewski was on his way back up after the back surgery in 1995. And the two teams met in late January in a crossroads game for both schools at that stage. And it was a terrific game, as you would expect in Cameron Indoor Stadium. And with about 40 seconds left, Duke had the ball up 1, and Krzyzewski called time. And I was standing on the edge of the Duke huddle and looking right at Krzyzewski as he drew the play he wanted to run a high screen for Trajan Langdon for a 3 for his team. And I'm looking right at Krzyzewski and right at the whiteboard that he's writing on. And, of course, the place is so loud. I'm standing 5 feet from Krzyzewski. I can barely hear what he's saying. And I looked around and I thought to myself, people would pay thousands of dollars to be standing where I am right now, and I'm actually getting paid to do this. How lucky am I? And I always remind myself of that whenever I have moments where the job gets tough, because every job has its bad days. You know that, Sam. But I remind myself of that moment, and I thought about it last Saturday walking down the ramp to the Palestra to sit courtside for the Michigan State-Penn State game. How lucky am I that I'm getting paid to walk in, sit there courtside, and enjoy a game like that. So I try to remember that every single day, even when I'm not getting to do something quite that cool.
It is pretty cool. The sports field is awesome. And, John, you're a man of many talents. You do great work across the board. But I know you're always working towards something else. So is there something you're currently working on, something up your sleeve?
Yeah, I am. Thanks for asking, Sam. Last year, obviously, I wrote and published The Legends Club, which was about Dean Smith, Mike Krzyzewski, and Jim Valvano, ironically enough, given the story I just told. And right now, I am finishing the writing, I hope, in the next few weeks, on a book on this past year's Ryder Cup at Hazeltine, which the U.S. won, and it's kind of an inside look at the players and the captains and what goes on behind the scenes at a Ryder Cup, and it'll be out this coming fall.
Awesome. Well, John Feinstein, we thank you so much for joining us here on the AE Hoops podcast. Again, you can find him on SiriusXM Radio, the Golf Channel, and he's a writer for the Washington Post, and also you may find him on CSN. John, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Sam. Always happy to do anything Frank Sullivan asks me to do.
This has been the AE Hoops podcast. Listen to more America East podcasts on the America East SoundCloud page and stay up to date on the latest America East news by visiting americaeast.com.